Well, I guess part of the character of this is that we don't know what's going to happen next. We can't predict what actions will take place from either side. We saw on Friday the United States applying more secondary and primary sanctions against Iran and officials close to the Iranian regime. We saw the Iranians accept responsibility for downing the Ukrainian plane, and also, as we know, as you mentioned there, Rosie, arresting, albeit for a short while, the UK ambassador. Here in Brussels, the priority really will be to keep tensions at bay and to really open channels or keep channels open for both sides to conduct some sort of diplomacy. I think that's where the EU says its strong ability to engage is. We saw an emergency Foreign Affairs Council meeting with all EU foreign affairs ministers on Friday. Every one of them in unison saying that they are recommitting to the Iran deal, in spite of the fact that the United States has called on all the other partners, the UN Security Council and the EU, to walk away from it. Very much here in Brussels, they're standing by it.
They made it very clear last week, the EU, that they were focused on restoring, as you mentioned, the nuclear deal, but also on de-escalation. Do they have a unified approach about how best to go forward? And if so, what is that?
Well, that's an interesting question, Rosie, because while the EU is saying it's committed to the Iran deal, and on Friday once again said that it wants Iran to get back to the table, because as we know, a week ago, the Iranians said they were withdrawing from it. And since the America pulled out of it, Iran has been breaching the limits of the Iran deal. The EU says it's committed to the JCPOA, but it wasn't able to explain how it would get both sides back on track. So even just saying that the Iran deal should be preserved is not enough to ensure that actually both sides are committing to it, because as we know, Iran needs to commit to it to ensure that nuclear weapons are taken off the table, and the United States has to play its part to then lift sanctions from Iran, and that doesn't seem to be in play. There doesn't seem to be any appetite here in Brussels for a JCPOA too. Joseph Borrell, the EU's foreign policy chief, he said at the weekend that he was concerned about the arrest of the UK ambassador, wants to ensure that the EU can play its role from diplomatic way, but again wasn't able to say whether or not the EU would commit to reopening the JCPOA. He said the Iran deal was painstakingly negotiated, it's incredibly complex, and the one that's on the table is the one that they'll be looking to keep intact.